The day Rocky Balboa taught Van Damme how to lose, the sound of gloves hitting the heavy bag echoed through Mickey's old gym in North Philadelphia. It was 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, and the place was supposed to be empty. But Jean-Claude Van Damme stood frozen in the doorway, watching a 77-year-old man work the bag with the same rhythm, the same determination, the same heart that had made him a legend 40 years ago. Rocky Balboa didn't notice he had an audience. Sweat dripped from his gray hair as he threw combination after combination, each punch carrying decades of muscle memory, each movement a testament to a life spent fighting, not just in the ring, but for every dream, every relationship, every moment that mattered. When Rocky finally stopped and turned around, he saw Jean-Claude standing there with tears in his eyes. The Belgian martial artist, now 63 years old and fighting battles that had nothing to do with movies or fame, had come to Philadelphia searching for something he'd lost. What he found was a man who understood that the hardest fights happen outside the ring, and sometimes the greatest victory is learning how to lose with dignity. "You okay, pal?" Rocky asked. His Philadelphia accent as warm and genuine as it had always been. "Mr. Balboa," Jean-Claude said, his voice breaking, "I came here because I don't know how to lose, and I think you might be the only person who can teach me." This is the story of how two fighters from different worlds discovered that the most important lessons aren't about winning. They're about getting back up when life knocks you down harder than any opponent ever could. The fall of a legend. Jean-Claude Van Damme had built his career on perfection. The splits between two moving trucks, the roundhouse kicks that could shatter boards, the flexible warrior who made the impossible look effortless. For 30 years, he had been the muscles from Brussels, the action star who embodied physical perfection and martial arts mastery. But at 63, the body that had been his fortune was betraying him. Chronic injuries from decades of stunts had left him in constant pain. His knees required cortisone shots just to get through the day. His back spasmed if he turned wrong. The splits that had made him famous now sent lightning bolts of agony through his hips. Worse than the physical decline was the emotional toll. His latest film had been a disaster, straight to streaming, barely noticed, quickly forgotten. The industry that had once celebrated him now saw him as a relic, a has-been trying to recapture glory that belonged to a younger man. But the final blow had come 6 months earlier, when his son Chris, following in his father's footsteps as an action performer, had been severely injured during a stunt gone wrong. Paralyzed from the waist down, confined to a wheelchair at 25 years old, Chris had looked at his father from his hospital bed and said, "I guess we Van Dammes aren't invincible, after all, are we, Dad?" Jean-Claude had spent his whole life teaching people, through his movies, his martial arts, his very presence, that with enough discipline, enough training, enough willpower, you could overcome anything. But now, faced with his son's condition, his own physical decline, and the brutal reality that some fights can't be won, he was lost. He had come to Philadelphia because someone had told him that Rocky Balboa still trained at Mickey's gym. Not the movie character, but the real man behind the legend, Sylvester Stallone, who at 77 was still fighting his own battles with aging, loss, and the weight of living up to an iconic image. The mentor he never expected lose, Rocky said, wiping his hands with a towel as he studied Jean-Claude's face. "Pal, I've lost more fights than most guys have even been in. You came to the right place." Rocky gestured toward 2 folding chairs in the corner of the gym, beneath faded photos of Philadelphia boxing legends. "Sit down. Tell me what's eating at you." For the next hour, Jean-Claude poured out his heart to a man he'd never met, but somehow trusted completely. He talked about his son's accident, about his own failing body, about the terrible helplessness of watching everything you've built start to crumble. "You know what your problem is?" Rocky said when Jean-Claude finished. "You think losing means you're done. But losing ain't the end of the story. It's just the middle chapter." Rocky stood up and walked to an old photo on the wall, a black and white image of himself after the first Apollo Creed fight, battered and bloody, but smiling. "This was taken after I lost," Rocky said. "Lost the fight, but won something bigger. I won respect from Apollo, from the crowd, from myself. See, I went 15 rounds with a heavyweight champion of the world when nobody thought I'd last 3 minutes. That loss taught me something no victory ever could." "What did it teach you?" Jean-Claude asked. "That it ain't about how hard you hit," Rocky said, reciting words that had become part of his legend. "It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward, how much you can take and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done." The training that changed everything. What happened next surprised Jean-Claude completely. Rocky didn't tell him to accept defeat gracefully or to retire with dignity. Instead, he said, "Come back tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. We're going to train." "Train for what?" Jean-Claude asked. "I'm 63 years old. My body is falling apart. What am I training for?" "You're training to lose better," Rocky said with a grin. "And once you learn how to lose right, maybe you'll remember how to win again." For the next 3 months, Jean-Claude came to Mickey's gym every morning. But this wasn't the training he expected. Rocky didn't push him to ignore his limitations. He taught him to work with them. "Your knees hurt?" "Good," Rocky said one morning, as Jean-Claude struggled through a modified workout. "Pain reminds you you're still fighting. The day it stops hurting is the day you're really done." Instead of the high kicks and aerial maneuvers that had defined his career, Jean-Claude learned to fight like Rocky, with heart, with determination, with the understanding that technique meant nothing without the willpower to endure. But the real training wasn't physical. Every day, Rocky shared stories of his own losses, the defeats in the ring, the failed businesses, the relationships that didn't work out, the times when his own body betrayed him. "I lost my friend Apollo," Rocky said one morning, his voice heavy with memory. "Lost Mickey, lost Adrian, lost fights, lost money, lost my way more times than I can count. But you know what I never lost?" "What?" Jean-Claude asked. "The belief that every loss teaches you something. Every time you get knocked down, you learn something about yourself, and if you're smart enough to listen, that lesson makes you stronger." The fight that wasn't a fight. 3 months into their training, Rocky made an unexpected announcement. "There's gonna be an exhibition match next week. Me and you. Not for cameras, not for money. Just for the neighborhood kids who come to watch us old guys pretend we still got it." Jean-Claude was horrified. "Rocky, I can't fight you. You're 77 years old, and I'm not the fighter I used to be." "Exactly," Rocky said. "That's why it's perfect. 2 old guys who can't do what they used to do, showing a bunch of kids that it ain't about being perfect, it's about showing up. The night of the exhibition, Mickey's gym was packed with local kids, their parents, and a few old-timers who remembered when Rocky was king of Philadelphia. Jean-Claude stood in one corner, more nervous than he'd been before any movie role or professional fight. The fight lasted 3 rounds, and it was beautiful in its imperfection. Rocky moved like the boxer he'd always been, but slower, more careful. Jean-Claude threw his kicks, but lower, more deliberate. Neither man was trying to win. They were both trying to demonstrate something more important. In the 3rd round, Jean-Claude threw a kick that would have been devastating 30 years earlier. Now, with his limited flexibility and aching joints, it barely reached Rocky's midsection. Rocky caught the kick easily and, instead of countering, helped Jean-Claude regain his balance. "You okay, pal?" Rocky asked, genuine concern in his voice. "I'm perfect," Jean-Claude replied, and for the first time in months, he meant it. The crowd cheered not for the technique or the power, but for the effort, for 2 legends showing that dignity wasn't about avoiding failure. It was about embracing it with grace. The lesson that saved a family. After the exhibition, Jean-Claude called his son Chris for the first time in months. The conversation he'd been avoiding, the words he'd been too afraid to say, finally came, pouring out. "I'm sorry," he told his son. "I'm sorry I taught you that being strong meant never failing. I'm sorry I made you think that your value was in what your body could do instead of who you are as a person." "Dad," Chris said from his wheelchair in Brussels, "are you okay?" "I'm learning how to lose," Jean-Claude said, "and it's the hardest thing I've ever done. But I think it might also be the most important." Jean-Claude spent the next week with Rocky, not training, just talking. About fatherhood, about aging, about the difference between being tough and being strong. "Your boy's gonna be okay," Rocky said on Jean-Claude's last morning in Philadelphia. "You know why? Because he's got a dad who's finally figured out that falling down ain't the problem. Staying down is the problem." The victory in defeat. Jean-Claude returned to Brussels a different man. He found Chris in physical therapy, working with a determination that reminded Jean-Claude of his own younger self, but tempered with something Jean-Claude had never possessed at that age: wisdom. "I've been thinking," Chris said as Jean-Claude watched him struggle with parallel bars. "Maybe this accident wasn't the worst thing that could have happened to me. Maybe it was just a different kind of training." Over the next year, Jean-Claude made 3 more films, but they were different kinds of movies. Smaller budgets, deeper stories, characters who struggled with real problems. He played fathers, dealing with loss, older men confronting their limitations, heroes who won by enduring rather than conquering. The critics noticed the change. Van Damme has found something in his later years that was missing from his action spectacular days. One review read, "Vulnerability, humanity, the understanding that true strength isn't about what you can do. It's about what you can survive." The legacy of learning to lose. Every year now, Jean-Claude returns to Mickey's gym for a week. He and Rocky train together, 2 old fighters who have learned that the most important victories happen outside the ring. This year, he brought Chris with him. Father and son, both changed by their respective battles, both understanding that strength isn't the absence of struggle. It's the presence of hope in the middle of it. Rocky and Chris hit it off immediately. "You know what I like about you, kid," Rocky told Chris after watching him transfer from his wheelchair to a weight bench with practiced ease. "You fight like your old man, not with your fists, but with your heart." On their last day in Philadelphia, Rocky gave Jean-Claude a gift, a pair of boxing gloves signed with a simple message. "It ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. Keep moving forward, pal. Rocky." Jean-Claude still has those gloves. They hang in his home gym in Brussels next to a photo of him and Chris taken after Chris's first adaptive martial arts competition. A competition Chris won not by being the strongest or the fastest, but by refusing to give up when every muscle in his body screamed for him to quit. The photo shows both men smiling, both understanding that they had learned the most important lesson of their lives. Sometimes the greatest victory is simply getting back up one more time than you fall down. That's not action movie heroism. That's real heroism. And sometimes that's the only kind that really matters. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten.